things about living in Bedford?
The river.
Grammar school.
Paula Radcliffe.
It's quite nice down the river.
I moved here in 1981 and it was cheap.
Everybody loves the river.
There's a lot of diversity going on.
Nice bit of local history and such like that.
The Panacea Society.
John Bunyan.
The river. Everybody knows about the airship.
Absolutely massive.
You can't miss it when it's up.
I think the good thing about Bedford is that people want to stay here.
The river.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from Bedford, a town that's had such an enormous impact on British society that when I told people I was doing a show here, 3/4 of them said, "What, you're doing it from a van?" But people here are aware of it. I asked on Twitter if anyone from Bedford could tell me what was here, and someone wrote, "We've got a prison full of people from Luton." The genius of this town is that even people who live here can't really say where it is. Because if someone says, "Is it in the Midlands?" the answer is not really. Well, is it in the south? Not really. East Anglia? Not really. Is it on the North Australian coast? Sort of, but not really. Actually, this is true. I looked up the AA directions to get here and it just says potter about and you'll stumble across it eventually. There are some mentions of Bedford on the internet. I found this description on TripAdvisor from someone who once lived here. "A snooty public school obsessed middle-class white ghetto. I hated every minute of it." They're snooty about Luton and wish they live in St Albans. They join the Rotary Club and cheat on their wives. The best thing about it is you can catch the late Thameslink train back from London and not worry about falling asleep as it's the end of the line. But in fact, it's much, much prettier than I thought it would be. You come here and you think, oh, it's going to be a little place. The highlight's probably the Quick Fit or something like that. But you get in and think, blimey, I didn't realise there was all this. They've got a river and everything. And you've got these lovely stone bridges over the river, and what you all seem very proud of is the new bridge. That's been lovingly designed to fit in with the older ones, and no expense has been spared, with the bill coming in at £8.95 from B&Q for a length of plastic. The brilliant thing about it, when it was built, it didn't even cross the whole river. Hang on, there's 3 foot short. We'll have to jump the last bit. This is all in keeping with the tasteful development known as Riverside North. Described by one of your residents when he came up to me in the high street. It honestly happened. Just ran across the street. "I hope you mention the achievements of Riverside North in this programme, in winning the Kim Jong-un Award for North Korean-style architecture." You don't seem to want to sell yourself in a big way here. You like that no one knows about the place. There's a book I got that's just there called Bedford by the River, a local book to promote the town, and it said, "Bedford is a minor tourist centre with no cathedral, castle or colleges to attract visitors. The surrounding countryside is flat and somewhat uninteresting, but the river has potential that's not been exploited." That must bring in the crowds, mustn't it? But there must be something else here, Bedford, because so many prominent characters are associated with the town. There's a statue of Trevor Huddleston, the anti-apartheid activist and a proud son of Bedford, because he lived here until he was 5. The Bedfordshire News tells us Bedford's Carol Vorderman represents our town on I'm a Celebrity. And she is from Bedford because her biography says Carol was born in Bedford, but her parents separated 3 weeks after her birth and her mother moved her to North Wales. Ronnie Barker is on a list of famous people from Bedford, as he was born here, and there's a plaque, so you can definitely claim him, as he lived here right up until he was 4. And then there's the one that almost everyone will tell you. You know, Glenn Miller, the band leader, this is where he did his last performance before being killed in a plane crash. All the other towns he performed in, when he left, he arrived at the next place safely. But not Bedford. So there's a statue and everything. According to the investigation, the crash was caused by a confusion with air traffic control, apparently, because they asked the pilot what area the plane was in. And the Bedfordshire People Past and Present website boasts another figure connected to Bedford is Terry Waite. Blimey, when Bedford people leave here, they want to make sure, don't they? Now, one of the first things that I was told when someone took me through the town centre was there aren't any of the major stores here because, I quote, Milton Keynes swipes all the big shops. Swipes them? So, like, was there a John Lewis here to start with? But one morning you all come into town and went, oh, not again. How are we going to fill that space now? We'll have to put another school there. But here's a question. I don't know the answer to this. Why are there so many public schools in Bedford? 7 or more. You don't need that many public schools in a town this size. But if you live here, you can't sleep for all the screams of boys getting thrashed in initiation ceremony. So Bedford School, which we're in right now, has a chapel choir, it has these beautiful lawns, but it had a fire that burnt down the main building in 1979. But because this is a public school, the school brochure says the dramatic event is known as the Great Fire. Of course it is, because this isn't just some chavvy comprehensive that just has a normal fire. Here, the fire ends up as a painting in the Louvre, and the poet laureate was commissioned to write a poem about it that went, ashes swirl in Bedford skies, decades shrunk to smithereens. Flames head west and no surprise, they end up swiped by Milton Keynes. I went round Bedford School, where we are now, and it's marvellous. I mean, we went into this one hall and he said this was specially designed with perfect acoustics for orchestral music, which, to be fair, was much the same at my school. There was one hall, in fact, where some kids put all the windows in, and I'm sure it's because the acoustics were bad for a Debussy concert. And then there's this page about school trips on the school website that boasts, in 2016, the geography class went to Iceland, the Spanish club went to Seville, there was a ski trip to Austria, the rowers went to Switzerland, and the art class went to the Higgins Museum in Bedford. One subject the Bedford schools are particularly known for is geography, because all the lesson is taken up with students asking, are we in the East Midlands? Does anyone work at the school? And so with the sport then, who's done well at sport from Bedford? Must be loads, isn't there? Alistair Cook, yeah. Oh, was Monty Panesar here, was he? Eddie the Eagle? Oh, Paula Radcliffe went here, did she? I was went to the state school.
That's why she pissed in the street.
Very good. There's a massive history, of course, to Bedford, because this was, at one point, a centre of radicalism. John Bunyan, the dissenter who wrote Pilgrim's Progress after the Civil War, he came from Bedford. And you're so proud of this fact that someone from the town sent me a message on Twitter that went, and that's the last time there was progress of any sort in Bedford. So Bunyan became a preacher, but he believed that the common person could be in touch with God as much as the gentry. And so after the Civil War, when the king was restored to the throne, this was considered a bit racy, and Bunyan was jailed along with the Quakers, or as it puts it in the John Bunyan Museum, Bunyan was a soldier, preacher and dissenter, spending a whopping 12 years in Bedford prison for illegal preaching! Exclamation mark. I thought, isn't that written by someone who usually does carpet adverts? If it's jailbirds you're looking for, we've got just the thing in Bedford with John Bunyan on offer with a whopping 12 years in prison. Did you say 12? That's right, 12. And there's more. But there's a more recent part of Bedford's history here that is obvious all round the town, because after the war, the Bedford brickworks needed hundreds of labourers. So they went to Naples and they put up adverts all round the city appealing for Italians to come here. And thousands of Italians came here to work. Mostly they came because they were sick of living in a place where everybody knew where it was. And so... And this means Bedford apparently now has the biggest percentage of Italians in the population of any town in Britain. And as a result, Bedford Council's website claims after New York and London, Bedford is the most diverse city in the world. Which sounds a little bit unlikely until you remember that anyone who's lived here 20 minutes is counted as coming from Bedford. There were 2 Italian churches, there was an Italian vice-consulate, dozens of Italian cafes where you meet people like Libby, who we're going to be talking to in a minute, who runs the coffee bar in the piazza. And it's brilliant talking to Libby because he's so Italian and so Bedford. What I love about the Italians here, they still talk like Italians but without the accent. So this is Bedford, it's the motherland, you understand. You want good cappuccino, you don't go to New York, you come to Bedford. They bring us here because we know how to make bricks. You never see a crooked Italian brick, maybe from Milan, but not from Naples. Gary Baldy, he come here, 1860. You know one day we all follow. He say, I fought a war to unite Italy. Now I try to unite Bedfordshire, but Luton, they're not interested. Many Italians, they come from Bedford. Leonardo da Vinci, he come from Bedford. I read it on Famous People from Bedford website. Verdi, you know, he composed the beautiful opera. He write magical arias of a boy and a girl from each side of the river. They are so much in love, but they can never meet because the bridge, it doesn't go all the way across. Right, Libby. Libby, so what else happens then that's Italian that makes you think, God, this wouldn't happen if there weren't all the Italians here?
Oh, if Italy wins the World Cup. That's a bit... Which has happened a couple of times, you know.
Yeah. And what happens when England wins the World Cup? When
well, it was in black and white at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry.
And one thing you would tell us, Libby, was about your father when he had a passport.
Yes, well, no, he had the alien card, which were like...
alien card?
Yeah, it had alien written on it, like, you know. Green, let's call it a passport. I always wanted to, like, keep this, but, yeah, one day I went home and it wasn't there anymore. And I asked him where it was. He goes, you don't need it anymore. We've got this now. And he took out the European passport.
Oh, right, so that's all gone well.
Yeah, that's gone really well, yeah, that's right. And I thought, yeah, we've got it all right.
Oh, well, that's nice. Well, I hope he's kept his alien card.
yeah.
What I loved when I first met Libby, because Carl, the producer here, used to be an ice cream man, and it was such a beautiful moment, because the two of you...
Cappuccino machine's the best. Yeah. And he's got one.
Yeah.
It's like the Ferrari of... You're not impressed, are you? It is. If anybody knows about ice cream machines, it's the Cappuccino one, because it gives you a lot of air. It gives you a lot of air. So when you guys get ice creams, have a look out. Like, if it's a thick one, then they're not making a lot of money, all right?
Oh, so that's why you're impressed with this machine. It's brilliant. You only need 4p worth of ice cream to last a year.
That's how it is. Yeah.
Because you've been here so long now, and it's sort of second, third generation, I suppose, then it all's really mixed in then, isn't it?
Yeah, well, everybody's mixed in. We're part of Bedford, part of Great Britain, really. Like my son here.
What's your name?
I'm Joseph.
He's English-Italian.
So who would you support if England were playing Italy?
I put the rugby on. Yeah.
You've raised him well. OK, thanks. Libby and Joseph, they've been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, when the Italians first came here, they were given short contracts, had to live in the old army huts, but those who stayed eventually did bring their families, and now there are lots of Italian shops here. Conte di Savoia, Italian tailors, makers of fine bespoke Italian suits, boasts on its website, Conte di Savoia earns another 5-star review. Well, of course it does. Who's going to give an Italian tailor a bad review? And there was one guy once, he only gave us 3 stars. You don't see him round there anymore. I went to an Italian club I won't say which one, to get a sense of the excitement and glamour of the Italian community in Bedford. And in a way I did, because the car park was absolutely full, and I got to the door and I could see all this stuff going on in a back room, and one man came to the door and said, "We're shut." I really wanted him to say, "Take a hike, sonny, you ain't seen nothing going on." And there was a red splattered stain on the doorstep. There really was. I mean, I'm not saying anything. It could well have been red wine, a certain sort of red wine that has hair and a tooth in it. It could have... But it's right that this club had lots more going on than I could see, because it's Bedford and you make everything like that here. There's a magazine here for the Italian community, by the way, that calls Controversy. Oh, I'm not going to do that, that's too rude. There's a magazine here for the Italian community that caused controversy because it published a story that went, a report has revealed Italian men should date East European women because they are willing to let their man rule and forgive cheating. But to be fair, if they're cheating on their wives, they're only trying to integrate into the customs of the local community. Told you. But nothing that happens here in this secret place with too much education is as beautifully seductive as the history of the wonderful Panacea Society. This is the cult that involved hundreds of people who set up a commune in Albany streets because they believed the Garden of Eden was in Bedford. Bless them. Now, several people have said to me here, when I've expressed a hint of doubt about this claim, it is a very pretty spot. And I accept that does pretty much clear up any lingering concern. Now, the Panacea Society's belief came from the verse in the book of Genesis that goes, "The Lord God planted a garden in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed and made trees grow out of the ground, and it was good, for the garden was in the east," though not really in the east. And it's true, because when God said, "Let there be light," he clearly meant the reflection from the Moat House Hotel. The Ark was obviously the airship out at Cardington, and the prodigal son was clearly from Bedford because he cleared off at the age of 4 and hasn't yet been back. Now, I'm going to be speaking over the next few minutes to Gemma, if Gemma's about.
She couldn't make it.
Oh, OK then. Well, I was going to ask a serious scientific question if anybody does know the answer. Why is the Garden of Eden in Bedford?
It's handy for the M1.
It's handy for the... It's handy for the M1, yeah. Eve? Yes, love? I've got to go to Leicester. The snake's not well. The wonderful part of the Panacea Society is that this, so far, is the sensible bit. Because... I might as well, she's not here. Because they believed in the holiness of a woman preacher called Joanna Southcott, who announced in the 1800s that at the age of 64 she was pregnant with a second Messiah sent by God. Joanna Southcott built up a mass following in the 1790s, but she then died and it was revealed that she hadn't been pregnant at all. Now, you can see why her followers were fooled. If a 64-year-old's stomach swells up, the most likely explanation is that she's pregnant with the Messiah. Who could guess it was some sort of illness? Some followers announced that she'd given birth, but to a gassy spirit that you couldn't see. I wish I was making this up. Joanna Southcott also left piles of writing that she called her prophecies, and one member of the Panacea Society said in an interview, "The writings are fascinating. She logs the conversations she has with the devil, and it's awful because the devil's so rude." That's shocking, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing being the Prince of Darkness. There's no need to forget your manners, is there? I suppose the conversation went, "I want your soul." What's the magic word? Please. That's better. Now, this next bit gets complicated. Joanna Southcott prophesied that there would be more prophets and then Jesus would return. And in 1919, a vicar's daughter called Mabel Bartrop announced that she was the final prophet predicted, whose real prophet name was Octavia. And she would prepare for the return of Jesus, because Joanna Southcott's prophecies were believed to contain the secrets of heaven on earth. But they were locked in a large wooden box, which Mabel, also called Octavia, said could only be opened if 24 leading bishops were present. But sadly, no bishops were interested. I bet they'd have done it if it was hosted by Noel Edmonds. Now, to be fair to Mabel, shortly after announcing she was a prophet, she booked herself into a mental hospital for 18 months. But this didn't deter her followers. At one point, there were 70 people living in the commune at Albany Road, and when Mabel returned from the asylum, according to her biography, she came to believe that if she went 77 steps from her house, Satan would attack her. This meant that from 1918 until her death in 1934, she was virtually a prisoner in her own house. Now, I don't wish to be scornful about anyone's faith, but as messiahs go, that doesn't put her up with the best, does it? She always hoped that she'd be able to overcome this affliction and be able to travel 1.5 miles so that at least she could get her own provisions. But none of her disciples had the heart to tell her that this wouldn't help, as all the shops had been swiped by Milton Keynes. In 1923, the Panacea Society decided it wasn't eccentric enough, and Mabel, or Octavia, issued a decree that she had the capacity to heal any illness by getting the patient to drink tap water that she'd breathed on. And her biography says her followers would drink the water and apply it to their bodies, but it was cumbersome to transport the water to followers who lived far away in places like Cornwall. So the solution was to cut great rolls of linen into tiny squares, which Octavia would breathe on and then send them in the post to the sick. And these are the only people from Bedford of any note who've bothered to stay. But whatever your opinion about divine breath, the Panacea Society was shrewd. They bought property in Bedford, which is now worth tens of millions, which is now part of a trust that funds groups around the town, and they even have one house called the Ark, which was left empty for years because it was being saved for Jesus when he comes back. Even the problems that you have here in Bedford wouldn't trouble Jesus. A bridge that doesn't go all the way across, that's not going to bother him, is it? Amongst the many things written about the society, do we know if they had their own prayers? I think they did. I think this is one of their own prayers. Give me strength through deed and prayer to praise the Lord who art in heaven. Let me hope the steps to there are no more than 77. Shame I came from the Panacea Society.
More than 77 steps away.
One reason that Jesus may well come to Bedford when he returns is for a Bedfordshire clanger. And do we still have Bedfordshire clangers? Yes. This is a sort of pasty. Traditional clanger recipes are to have beef up one end with rhubarb and custard, that sort of thing. Is that... Libby, do you sell them, or are they...
Only during festivals, but...
All right, do you just get a little bit of a clanger, then pump it full of air? Now, also, other things I found out, I do know this, some mothers do have them. The TV show in which Frank Spencer broke everything was filmed in Bedford. One famous episode filmed here was when he was put in charge of building a bridge. As your engineering has been so successful, you've been put in charge of building something simple like an airship. The airship went over today. Did everyone see the airship? These are made and stored in these massive hangars in a place called Cardington, and they're 300 feet long, these airships, and they are the longest aircraft currently in the world. So, do we know who one of the main investors in the airships was?
Bruce Dickinson.
Bruce Dickinson, of Iron Maiden?
Yes.
Yeah. It's brilliant. Everybody knows that. Bruce Dickinson. But they look fantastic. I was allowed into the field where the airship bobbles about on the grass, and it's just ridiculously huge. And no one can travel in the actual airship bit. I'm so daft, right? Because I thought, oh, do people all cram into there? But you can't, because it's all full of helium. Right? It would be terrible if that leaked out. It's not only would there be a disaster, but the pilots have no dignity at all. This isn't just a new fad. Airships have been travelling from here since the 1920s. The famous R101 that crashed in Paris set off from here, which makes me think, you're a bloody jinx, Bedford. I'm not getting on anything that sets off from here. I'm uneasy about getting on the Thames link. It's no wonder they put the airport in Luton, is it? You've played an important part in the military here, Bedford. During the war, the BBC Symphony Orchestra was evacuated to here, to the Corn Exchange, in secret. And so every night on the radio, after a performance, an announcer said, "This is the BBC Symphony Orchestra, coming from somewhere in England." Lovely, isn't it? And it was assumed that this was said to keep the location secret, though it was recently revealed it was because it's the best description of where Bedford actually is. And you've come up with a whole new way to transform the economy by introducing a whole new tax called the Bedford bid, a special levy that businesses have to pay that goes towards making Bedford attractive to visitors. Whose idea was it to set up a protection racket in a place already full of Italians? One product paid for by the bid is these people who wander around with blue hats helping out visitors, giving answers to their queries such as, I'm sorry, we don't have a Debenhams, you'll have to go to Milton Keynes. That's... Oh, yeah, you have got a Debenhams.
It might have gone by now.
I think, in fact, you actually like most people not really knowing where Bedford is, because then they can't come here and spoil it. I think there's a bit of that. You don't like people knowing it's here. When the kids come here to board at the private schools, they probably get dropped off at Leighton Buzzard and then they're blindfolded, put in a car and brought in the boot so they can't tell anyone where it is. And there's a big immigrant population here with no apparent tension and everybody gets along. You don't want that getting out. That puts you at odds with the whole direction of the Western world. Nelson Mandela came here to commemorate his friend Trevor Huddleston. I bet you had to keep that quiet. When he said to my good friend Trevor, who spent many years in Bedford, you went, shh, no one tell him he left when he was 5. This bloke spent 5.5 times as long in prison as he lived here. And if you want to keep secrets, it doesn't hurt that 1/5 of the population is Italian, does it? I can't say, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it was. The whole town feels like you walk through doors and then suddenly go, wow, I didn't realise all this was in here. You come into a home counties town, there are thousands of Italians. You walk into a shed, there's an airship. You go through a school gate and there's a planetarium and the Elgin marbles. You stroll down a suburban road, there's the Garden of Eden and a house for Jesus. So I'll leave you, Bedford, with the words of your most famous product, John Bunyan, who actually did stay here, albeit because he had no choice as he was in prison for a whopping 12 years. And this section of Pilgrim's Progress, which many believed was inspired by his times in this very splendid secret town. Christian sat by the grass as Mr. Worldly Wiseman promised to teach him the lessons of how to reach the land of morality. You must learn fortitude and valour, he said, while gazing in the direction of Mr. Feeblemind, and I can teach you such disciplines. It will cost £6,000 a term, but the good news is we do a lot of rowing. Near nightfall, he was assailed by a young farmer who spoke of life in morality. And when Christian contemplated his destiny, he became aware of a time when he would find morality. It would lay close to strength, but not really in strength, more sort of in courage, but not really courage either. You know, wisdom, well, not really there.
Mike Steele nella nostra città è stato performed by Mark Steels con materiali di Pete Sinclair, è prodotto in Bedford da Carlo Cooper, è stato una BBC Studios produzione. Bada bing.
Thank you very much, Bedford.